All right, what's up, Dragon Brew? We're going to hop right into the card today. This is day 7. There wasn't really previews on day 6, so let's just see what we got. So we're starting with Hazard Root Herbalist. It's a 2 colorless and a green for a 1/4 Rabbit Druid. Whenever you attack, target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. If that creature is a token, it also gains Death Touch until end of turn. Oh, this is interesting. So now your 1/1s actually get a little bit of bite to them, right? You can give something +1 and Death Touch. It just says whenever you attack, so you would need multiple of these to get multiple triggers that give this ability. But giving something +1 and Death Touch when it's a little token could be kind of annoying for the opponent that you can get some chip damage in there and they don't want to block it. So maybe reasonable. Also interesting that this is a green rabbit. So I guess we're going to be in white and green for rabbits. But yeah, this one's just interesting. Though I also do want to take a second to say that last card actually has another reasonable uncommon, which has been a very consistent theme so far with these Bloomburrow previews. But this one is Rotten Mouth Viper. 5 colorless and a black, so a 6 mana 6/6. As an additional cost to cast a spell, you can sacrifice any number of non-land permanents. The spell costs 1 less to cast for each of those permanents you sacrifice this way. Whenever it enters or attacks, you put a blight counter on it. Then for each blight counter on it, each opponent loses 4 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. Man, I don't know how good this is. It's an elemental and a snake, which there aren't much of either. There's more elementals you could still play around if you wanted to theme a deck, but I'm wondering, like, could this be a splash card in the squirrels deck that makes a bunch of tokens, whether those be squirrels or food, and then you can sack those to play like a 2 mana 6/6 that potentially comes on the battlefield and opponents have to sacrifice that many things? I don't know. It's a little weird because they only sack 1. Then when you attack, they have to sack 2. So, like, man, I don't know. This feels playable, right? It's almost like Annihilator in a way, but it's like a gradually bigger Annihilator. So this is probably playable. I don't know what the deck would look like that wants to play it yet, but it feels like there's a reasonable opportunity to play this card. Stalker Warlock. It's a 2 colorless and a black for a 2/2 lizard warlock with menace. When it enters, choose target opponent. If they lost life this turn, they reveal your hand, you choose a non-land card from their hand, and they discard that card. Otherwise, they just discard a card. So you play it, your opponent discards a card. If they've already taken damage, you get to choose what they discard. This is fine. I mean, if there's some discard theme sub-element to playing lizards, I guess this could be a thing. Probably not a card we're going to lean on, but it's at least an option if you're playing discard. We're going to go look at the translations on this one. This is called Stormbreaker. It's 3. This is a cool piece of art, by the way. He's got like the fish bones as like a staff. I don't know what's going on there, but it's 3 colorless and a red for a 1/4 with haste. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, this is an Otter, obviously, from the artwork. When you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a token copy of Stormbreaker. Exile those copies at the beginning of the next end step. So this is pretty sweet. So for every instant or sorcery you cast, you get a copy of this. However, what that means is, let's say you play something for 1 blue, right? You copy Stormbreaker. Then you play something for 1 red. You copy Stormbreaker and you copy Stormbreaker because each copy has the same abilities. So they get exponentially more. So you could save up and do like 3 spells in a turn. You end up with like, what is that, 12 creatures or something that are attacking because they all have haste. So like, this is kind of wacky, but kind of cool. Actually, you'll go from 2 to 4 to 16, actually. I think is how that works. 2 to 4 to 8. So yeah, this is kind of cool. I'm into this. This could be a whole lot of fun. It is 4 mana, which is the downside to this. Unless we have more cards to just like make otters cheaper. If we do, then totally reasonable, go with it. If not, you probably aren't playing more than 1 or 2 of these in your deck, I'd imagine, if at all. Sinister Monolith, 3 colors and a black for an artifact. At the beginning of combat on your turn, each opponent loses 1 and you gain 1. You can tap it and pay 2 life, sacrifice this and draw 2 cards. You activate it as a sorcery. This looks like a artifact. However, When you consider the fact that several of the bats I believe we've seen in this set have something that care about your life total changing, this is just something that automatically does it every turn. I guess to some extent also the lizards, I believe, have the ability that if your opponent lost life each turn. So this could go into some of those builds. It does cost 4, so it's not like the cheapest thing, but you also get a chance to draw 2 cards off of it, which gives it a little bit more action. So while I don't think you play a lot of these, this is plausible to show up in several deck lists. All right, we have Seasoned Warren Guard, 1 mana, 1/2. So another 1 mana rabbit here. Whenever Seasoned Warren Guard attacks while you control a token, Seasoned Warren Guard gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So not as explosive as the other ones, but if you are doing the tokens thing, you're often attacking with a 3/2 for 1 mana, so that's doable. How much better is it than the other 1 mana things we've seen from like rabbits and mice or whatever? Not as good, I don't think, but if I'm playing tokens, I'll at least experiment with this card. Hazels Nocturn, 3 colors and a black for an instant. Return up to 2 target creatures from your graveyard to your hand. Each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. I mean, we seem to get a lot of variations of this card, like pay 4 or 5 mana, return 2 things, something happens. They generally don't get a lot of play. If it was something that like allowed a thing to come into the battlefield, I think it would be pretty good. But this is one that I think we're just going to put to the wayside. Again, historically, we haven't played these. It doesn't mean that can't change in the future, but I don't think we're playing this card in 60-card Magic. Patchwork Banner. 3 colorless artifact. As it enters, you choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. Tap, add 1 mana of any color. Yeah, this is fine. I feel like we've seen... Oh, I guess the other banner previously that did this was a while ago, but like you chose a color, I think, and your creatures got +1/+0. Here you get a +1/+1 for whatever creature type, and you get to add mana. Like, this is actually just a reasonable card. I could see something like this maybe even going into, like, Raccoons, since they have a lot of stuff that's 4, 5, 6 that they're going to want to play. You know, I think really any type of theme deck that has a 4 or 5 mana component to it, I think probably also wants this. But there is a reasonable argument to be made for even something like rabbits, maybe even otters. If you're trying to play multiple spells in a turn, this could give you the extra mana to justify that. But either way, this is at least playable. Jackdo Savior, 2 colorless and a white for a 3/1 bird cleric. It has flying. When it that or another creature you control with flying dies, return another target creature card with lesser mana value from your graveyard to the battlefield. Now, this card's actually pretty sweet. So, when this dies or another thing with flying dies, you return a card from your graveyard with lesser mana value. So, if this dies, you return something that costs 1 or 2 mana. And same thing for every other card you have. Like, yeah, this is just quality, right? You have to exile the creature, or you're kind of going to be dealing with this chain of lesser powerful birds, I guess, but you'll still be dealing with them. So yeah, this is actually not bad. It's not insane because it is only a 3/1, but still more than playable. Right, here's Paw Patch Recruit. 1 green for a 2/1, so another 1 mana rabbit here in green this time with Offspring 2. It has Trample, weird, on a 2/1. Whenever a creature you control becomes a target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control other than that creature. So basically, if something else gets, let's say, go for the throat, you get to put a +1/+1 on something else that remains effectively. Now, this is pretty cool because it has Offspring. So you can play it on turn 1, but if you play it on turn 3, well, now you get 2 things that when any of your stuff's targeted by the opponent, then you get to put 2 counters on other stuff. This is actually a pretty good card. Like, it's good enough that it could also exist in some other non-rabbit decks, right? There's probably some Gruul or mono green that just wants early attackers, but also get some value from those tokens later. Being able to pump your stuff up is pretty nice. A little bonus if you're playing some type of mono green +1/+1 type stuff. This could be pretty good in that build. So yeah, some neat stuff going on here. Like, I don't think the card's insane, but it's definitely playable. Lunar Convocation. A black and a white enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, each opponent loses a life. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained and lost life this turn. So if you gained, and lost. So you have to have gained some and lost some. you create a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying. Oh, but you could pay a colorless and a black to pay 2 life to draw a card. Well, that makes sense. So this is a card that almost fuels itself, right? So at the beginning of your end step, if you gain life for the turn, each opponent loses a life. So you have things already in this deck that want you to gain life. And then at your end step, if you've also lost life in addition to gaining life, you'll get a bat. So you could effectively have anything on your turn that says gain life. You pay 2 to draw a card. Now you're getting a bat in addition to your opponent losing a life. This is probably reasonable even if you never get the bat portion, honestly. Like, just gaining life every turn, opponent loses a life, it's just fueling all the other stuff that the bat deck wants to do, but also could work in just a life gain deck of sorts. So it'd be interesting to see where this goes, because I think this fits into several builds. Pileated Provisioner, 4 colorless and a white for a 3/4 Bird Scout with flying. When it enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control without flying. Yeah, this is strictly limited fodder. You shouldn't even be considering this for 60 card Magic. Too expensive, and the ability's kind of linear. Waren Elder, colorless and a white for a 2/2 Rabbit Cleric. Pay, or 3 colorless and a white. Creatures you control get +1/+1 till end of turn. Yeah, again, this is more limited action. They're just better rabbits you can play if you want to be doing rabbit things. This doesn't target anything that has the new rabbit ability, Valiant. So yeah, probably not anything you're going to play in 60 card builds. Mind Spiral, 4 colorless and a blue. You can gift a tapped fish as a sorcery. Target player draws 3 cards. Then if a gift was promised, tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. Yeah, there's no way to make this cheaper. Getting 3 cards is nice, but we have a lot of other cards that could let you either get 3 or look at way more than 3 that are more efficient than this. So you're probably not playing this one either. Glide Dive Duo, colorless and a black for a Bat Lizard, 3/3. When it enters, each opponent loses 2 and you gain 2. Yeah, again, so far the commons they have shown today, which previously some of the commons have been pretty good, but today these are all kind of just not playable, I don't believe. Thornplate Intimidator, 3 colorless and a black for a 4/3 Rat Rogue with Offspring 3. That's kind of a high cost for Offspring. When this creature enters, target opponent loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. Ah, that's why. So you cost them lose 3 or they discard. Yeah. This is just expensive. Like, even for the rats, like 4 mana 4/3 isn't great. You need to get to 7 to really take advantage of this. But this is, of the commons that we've seen so far today, this is the closest to being playable. I still think the answer is no, you don't play this, but it's a lot closer. Kindle Spark Duo, 2 colorless and a red for a 1/3 Lizard Otter. You tap it, deal 1 damage to target opponent. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, untap Kindle Spark Duo. I don't think you play this. I think there's just better 3 mana Otters you want in the, Spells Matter deck. But if you need a budget option of something, this is a 1/3, not spectacular, not terrible, but it does potentially do multiple damage in a turn. I don't hate it. Not in love with it by any stretch, but I don't hate it. This is okay. I probably still wouldn't play it, but if I'm tight on a budget and I'm just casting a bunch of spells, I'd at least consider it. Reptilian Recruiter, 3 colorless, red for a 4/2 Trample Lizard Warrior. When this enters, choose target creature. If that creature's power is 2 or less, or if you control another lizard, you gain control of that creature until end of turn. Untap it, it gains haste. Okay. This is just another version of the steal a creature thing. However, this time you get to make a 4/2 with Trample, and if you have another lizard, you just steal anything. Otherwise, you steal something with power 2 or less. There are times in a metagame where this ability is useful. Now, generally, we're getting it on 3 or 4 mana things. We're rarely playing 5 mana ones. However, for that 1 extra mana, maybe 2, that we would play otherwise, like, we are getting a 4/2 Trampler. So that's not anything to turn your nose up at. That is a real thing. So if you end up in a world where, let's say, frogs or large raccoons or whatever are a real thing, being able to steal their largest creature and attack them with it for a turn does actually have some value. So I'm not going to say this is one you're definitely playing in Lizards, because you're probably not, but don't be surprised if this shows up in some budget lists. Or Squeak, that's a hilarious name, even more so with the artwork. It's 1 red for an aura enchant creature. When it enters, target creature an opponent controls can't block this turn. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has haste. This is cute. It's probably not making the cut in 60 card decks, but if you're playing a super aggressive limited pile, I could see why you would play this. Bushy Bodyguard. These names on some of these creatures are great. But Bushy Bodyguard's a colorless and a green for a Squirr Warrior that's a 2/1 with Offspring 2. When this card enters, you may forage. Forages, exile 3 cards from a graveyard or sacrifice a food. If you do, you put 2 counters on this card. Wow. Okay, so if you are doing the thing that is putting stuff in the graveyard and or making lots of food, this is pretty cool because for 2 mana, you get a potentially 4/3 creature for 2. If you have Offspring and you have enough food or cards in graveyard, you're effectively getting a 4/3 and a 3/3 for 4 mana. Like, that's reasonable. I think if I'm playing squirrels and can generate enough food, I would consider this card. Rush Shield Rampager, 3 colorless and a green for a 4/4 Raccoon Warrior with Offspring 2. This creature can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Now, generally, I would say this is a card you're not going to play. But we may be in a world of very small mice and very small squirrels. And if we are, a 4/4 for 4 straight up is actually okay with the ability that a big chunk of your opponent's stuff won't be able to block it. But you get also a 1/1 that they can't block either. And if you're playing raccoons, there's probably ways to pump it up and do other things. So generally, I'm going to say this is no, we're not playing it because I think we can get more for 4 mana in these decks. But there may be 1 or 2 cases in the metagame where having like 2 of these in your deck is fine, and you're probably not even playing the Offspring on it when you do. Fountainport Bell, 1 colorless for an artifact. When it enters, you can search your library for a basic land, reveal it, shuffle your library, put the card back. You can pay 1, sacrifice the bell, draw a card. Oh, you don't even you put the card on top. You don't even put the basic land into your hand. Oh, so you search and put it on top, or then you can pay 1 and sacrifice this, draw a card. Yeah, I think this is mostly limited fodder. We have better ways to search and ramp, I think. It's not terrible, but I don't think it's 60 card playable in most builds. Uncharted Haven. When it enters tapped, as it enters, choose a color. You add 1 mana of the chosen color. This is just mana fixing in limited. Nothing wrong with it. Especially if you need multicolors for trying to do any of the new creature themes across multiple colors. But for 60 card, we're probably not playing this. Kitsa, Otter Ball Elite. It's a colorless and a blue for a 1/3 Otter Wizard with Vigilance and Prowess. You can tap to draw a card, then discard. You can pay 2 and tap it to copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You can choose new targets. Activate only if Kitsa's power is 3 or greater. Interesting. Okay. So there's a 2 mana 1/3, has Vigilance and Prowess, and it can let you draw cards and discard a card. This actually makes it probably playable on its own. Like, it's a 1/3, it has Prowess, it's going to fit right in if you're doing the Otter Spells Matters thing, and it has Vigilance, so you don't even have to give up its ability to draw every turn. So, yeah, that alone makes it good enough. If you end up in a situation where the power is big enough, and you get to copy spells, that's pretty good, right? Because you could effectively, like, Prowess with something that pumps the power of your Otters, or even this Otter, then you attack, you can draw a card, or you can just copy the next thing you would play during combat and still get another Prowess trigger. So there's probably some silly things you're going to be able to do with this card. This is actually pretty sweet. Valley Mightcaller. Looks like a raccoon and rabbit in the distance. This is a 1 green mana, 1/1 Frog Warrior. It has Trample. Whenever another frog, rabbit, raccoon, or squirrel you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on Valley Mightcaller. Oh yeah, this is cool. So, interestingly, if there are enough frog, rabbit, raccoon, squirrels that put +1/+1 counters, you can just play that whole theme with this. Otherwise, you can just play this in a frog deck, or a raccoon deck, or a squirrel deck, and then just every turn just put a +1/+1 counter on this when creatures enter. And again, it doesn't say once per turn, like we've seen on some cards in previous sets. This also doesn't say non-token. So those are very 2 important things not on this card. So if you have a way to generate a bunch of tokens, whether that be from Offspring, from anything that just generates a token a turn, whatever, this gets to progressively get bigger. If you're just playing it in the theme deck already that plays a lot of frogs and a lot of squirrels, like that's a thing. So yeah, this card's reasonable. I think there's a lot of builds where this card could work. Fable Passage. Well, we've seen Fable Passage before. So Fable Passage, it's a land, you tap, sacrifice it, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. If you control 4 or more lands, untap that land. So basically, early in the game, it just searches and puts it in tap. Later in the game, it searches for an untapped basic. We know this card's good and playable. It's still played in some other formats today. The card's solid. All right, that's a good run through. We got through, what's that, 25, 26 cards? And we saw, again, a lot of uncommons. That's been a very solid theme so far through these previews. The commons today were lacking a little bit, so that's a little bit disappointing. But there were a couple of good ones in there. And several of the rares and mythics that you're going to open are playable. Now, several of them are tied to themes, so you're probably going to need to build some of those particular decks. But there were a couple of, like, what's it called? The Rottenmouth Viper doesn't really fit a particular theme, but could just go into a fair amount of decks and be reasonable. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how these cards fit some of the various builds. As a reminder, I'm going to go ahead and link my playlist, so if you want some early rotation ready stuff, that'll be there if you just want to build and not waste your wildcards. Otherwise, why don't you check out the other reviews I have of Bloomburrow? I'll link that here for you. But that's all I have for now. We'll see you next time.